A presentation of the United States Fish and Wildlife Service National Conservation Training Center, providing leadership in learning to conserve fish, wildlife, and natural resources.
This is Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge on North Carolina's Atlantic coast. And as its name suggests, it teems with life. This is a land of striking beauty and amazing biological diversity. For countless generations, this place has echoed with the sounds of nature. Yet there is one voice that fell silent for decades, until recently. But now, from the brink of extinction, the red wolf is back. This is a success story, not only for the wolf, but also for other imperiled species. Many people have contributed to this program, and its positive effects felt far beyond Alligator River.
Well, the Red Wolf Project was the first successful reintroduction of wolves anywhere. It was the first attempt and successful attempt at reestablishing an animal that was extinct in the wild. It was the first successful reintroduction of an animal using captive stock. It definitely has not been easy. It's been a long road.
Its scientific name is Canis rufus. When the first Europeans settled this continent, the red wolf hunted in nearly a third of what we now know as the United States. The gray wolf lived in the north and to the west. The Mexican wolf roamed the southwest. And the wolf's cousin, the coyote, thrived on the Great Plains. For thousands of years, the red wolf was the top predator in its domain. But then the predator became prey.
The southeastern United States were actually the first settled by Europeans, and Europeans brought with them the fear and misunderstanding that comes from many of the fables that so many of us are familiar with. And so persecution was widespread upon the red wolf in poisoning and shooting and trapping. Bounties were absolutely paid for wolves, and even here in North Carolina in the middle and late 1700s, bounties were actually paid for wolf scalps.
Then came more modern pressures. Wilderness gave way to human conveniences. For centuries, we have stripped our land of its biological diversity. But in the 1960s, we began to take stock of what we had lost and what we were about to lose. The red wolf, along with many other animals and plants, were near extinction. In 1967, the red wolf was America's most endangered mammal.
If the road to extinction was 100 miles long, the red wolf was already in the 99th mile and was about to drop off of the edge into extinction.
Regulated killing and the loss of habitat devastated the wolf population, and the coyote moved in on wolf territory.
Red wolves and coyotes are closely related and could be considered cousins. Coyotes tend to be smaller with a much more pointed muzzle, but the main difference really is in their behavior. Coyotes are much better adapted at life near people, something that wolves find much more difficult.
Wolves and coyotes compete for space, and some may interbreed, creating hybrids in the family tree. By 1970, the red wolf had retreated to a small pocket of land on the Texas-Louisiana border.
The red wolf was not existing in this area because that's where it desired to be. The red wolf had been annihilated everywhere else in its historic range in the southeast, and this was the final place where it was allowed to remain.
These coastal marshes are good for raising cattle and perfect for mosquitoes and waterfowl. But for the wolves, life was miserable.
These animals were in the worst condition I'd ever seen a wild animal in. They were heavily infested with mange, they were heavily loaded with heartworms, and they were heavily infested with hookworms and roundworms. We had to be very careful with animals we caught because it would be very easy to stress them and cause them to die.
There were so few wolves that the adults had trouble finding mates.
What happened with the red wolf was that range was so small, and red wolf numbers were so small, that a very small number of interbreeding events causes a serious problem to the red wolves. So what we were left with were very few red wolves and lots of coyotes. So red wolves were essentially breeding themselves out of existence because there are more coyotes with which to mate with than red wolves.
Time was running out for Canis Rufus. To save the red wolf, Carly and the recovery team would have to find them, capture them, and remove them from the wild.
We were proposing to save this animal by intentionally putting it into extinction in the wild and then try to get it back out in the wild. Another thing that was very dangerous about this approach was that there never in history had been a successful reintroduction of wolves, and yet we were saying that reintroduction is going to be the salvation of this animal. I hate to say that it was hopeless, but it was about as close to hopeless as one can get.
It was an all-out race against extinction.
Over 100 animals that was caught down there, only 14 ended up being good red wolves.
But with those 14 good wolves rested the only hope for the species' survival.
Our role in this process is to put the wolf back. We took the wolf out of the wild. By our hands, we made it as imperiled as it was, through habitat alteration, through persecution, and it's up to us to put them back.
It's taken more than 20 years, but the red wolf is rebounding.
Oh, that's the best part. That's the best part.
Nearly 100 live in the wild today, and about 200 more are cared for in zoos and other breeding facilities on coastal islands.
I'm going to be giving them some medicine here. They've had a little staph infection on their feet.
The purpose of the island, what we call the island propagation program, is to basically prepare wolves for release in the wild. What we were left with when we decided to remove those final 14 animals from the wild were captive animals, essentially. They bred in captivity, but we were left with animals that had never lived in the wild. So we used the island program as an intermediate step.
The island sites give young pups time to learn the ways of the wild, yet remain under the watchful eye of caretakers. With wildness restored in their hearts, they are ready to survive on their own at Alligator River. The red wolf family tree gets stronger each year, but one thing never changes. When you trace the tree's roots, they always lead back to the 14 wolves and a place in Tacoma, Washington. This is Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium. Once the remaining red wolves were captured, biologists brought them here to defy the odds, to accomplish something that had never been done before.
I suspect that there were times when those who were involved in getting the program up and running wondered whether or not the wolves would make it, if indeed the program got started too late.
The heart and soul of these recovery programs is the captive breeding program. Even if reintroduction should fail, 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road, biologists of that generation may have additional knowledge or technology that will allow them to successfully reintroduce the animal, and without the zoos maintaining a pure genetic stock, these people would not be able to accomplish the task.
There was little room for mistakes. The red wolf was extinct in the wild. The entire population lived behind a fence. The work was careful and tedious.
There was no cookbook. There was no recipe for how do you recreate a population in captivity.
We were flying by the seat of our pants.
In 1977, the first litter of red wolf pups was born in captivity. That day was a significant victory.
Their kids or their grandkids were going to be the ones that would eventually be released into the wild.
Finally, in 1987, after a decade behind fences and 3 generations removed from the wild, the red wolf was returning to its ancestral range.